So we are starting now, Mark. Okay?
And I'm turning my phone kind of to mute.
Okay. Okay. So, hello and welcome to a new episode of the weekly Spielworxx chat, season 2. My name is Uri Blennemann. I'm having a guest today, my friend Mark Herman, all around great guy, very prolific game designers, in my opinion, one of the best game designers around. And he's also, as you may know, the inventor of the card driven games genre. That started with We the People. So, welcome, Mark. How are you?
I'm vaccinated. I'm all vaccinated and starting to live a little, easy. My stress level is much lower than it has been for the last year.
Yeah, I can imagine. And one thing is also sure, in the US, you are so much faster than here in Germany. So for me personally, it will be doubtful if I get a vaccinated before Essen time, so before October. Could be also December, I'm not sure. But it is what it is. And I'm glad that you got your vaccination and everything's
Well,
all right.
what a difference an election makes. As it was the former administration, I think I would be in the same boat you're in.
Yeah, most probably. And let me briefly say hello to Chris. Good to see you. To Mo. Hello from Texas. Hello to Texas. There is my good friend Christoph. Hello. Hi to Munich. And there is Steve. And he's also saying hi to you, of course. And Karthik from Düsseldorf. Good to see you. There is Steffen. Steffen, as you know,
Yep.
we played at
Take
the
a breath.
same table. And he said, well, Stefan actually he played another round of Westphalia. So, yeah, and he's looking forward to our next game. And hello, Daniel.
And
So,
we're on for the 27th, I believe. Yes.
yes, we are playing on the 27th with that brute, Stefan, and actually with Christopher Munich, who is here as well. Yeah, and by the way, this is an XXL episode today, so it's not 30 minutes, but 60 minutes. For me, it's easy because Mark is doing most of the talking. But I thought, well, having Mark here as my guest and then just talk for 30 minutes is not doesn't feel right. So we'll see. And of course, if you have a question here, if you have a comment, please post it in the chat window so that we can respond. But let us start, Mark. Or please start with a brief introduction of yourself, your personal background, and all this.
Well, I was born in Brooklyn, which is not. I was born about 3 miles from where I'm sitting. Grew up in New York, educated public education all the way through till I got to Georgetown University, where I got my master's degree. Uh, I became a game designer. I started playing games when I was 12, war games when I was 12. I got Avalon Hill's Battle of the Bulge was my first war game, and I sort of just became my hobby became my job, became my career. I mean, it's just one of those unusual things. I suppose it's really a testament to my lack of imagination.
Ah.
So, so, so I, so I went. So when I guess, I went to college. I got a degree in history, and I thought I was getting one in biology also, but that's a longer story. And 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 I kind of got out of college, and like anybody, I was very anxious to not be on my own. I mean, my parents were wonderful, and they took care of me and all that. But I just did, with two more boys behind me, I just didn't want to be a burden, and I just wanted to be on my own and pay my own bills and eat my own. That was always a big thing with me. So I became. I used to climb tree. I used to prune and cut down trees for a living. I would work for a company doing tree work, and but a year prior to that, and that's I guess where the story. I think you want to talk about SPI.
Yes.
Uh, a year prior to that was the first Origins. I think 1975 was the first Origin. I just finished my junior year of undergraduate university, and so I went to Origins, and I went up to the SPI booth specifically, I said, how do you get a job as a game designer? Well, who wouldn't, it seemed like I didn't know. I was at that point in my life where I had to figure out what I was going to do in one more year. So I started, this was the first thing. I was there. I asked them. And what was interesting is the first person I spoke to, who became still a good friend, Kevin Zucker, was
Yeah, I know him as well. Yes.
yeah. So Kevin, kind of was looked at me like I was an idiot, probably for multiple sets of reasons. And then they sent over the guy named Harry Barish, who was the sort of the business manager of SPI. He was like the operations guy, and he gave me said, show up at these Friday night playtesting sessions, write an article for Moves magazine, and so we get to know you and all this kind of stuff. And so over the course of my senior year in college, I went to SPI about once a month, maybe, and then maybe, about once a month or so, I would go to SPI and I'd play test, and I got to meet people. And also, what's very notable is that the first Origins, I was playing this game called La Bataille de la Moscova, which was the first one of that series.
The huge Napoleonic one, yes.
Yeah. Great game. And I got sold the game by Larry Groves, who was one of the original designers of the system. And so Larry wasn't selling enough games, so he wanted to start a game, like a demo game. So I got into that, and I basically played La Bataille for the next 48 hours at Origins. I didn't do anything else. I just sat and played there. And then somewhere around 3 o'clock in the morning of the last day, like on the Sunday, this guy named Richard Berg comes in. First time I heard Richard.
Yeah.
And Richard goes, what's going on? I explained to him. We hit it off, I would say, pretty much immediately. We just kind of got each other. And so fast forward, so Richard is putting together, based on seeing La Bataille, the Terrible Swift Sword, which was a big Getty game, if anybody doesn't know that. And I play tested that game a bit for him, particularly the Tickets Charged scenario. A friend of mine, Gary Gonzalez, who you might have met somewhere along the years, and I went in there and played and all that. And then, fast forward, I get out of college. I'm now working in trees, and I'm also a bill collector for a newspaper, and doing, but I'm paying my own bills. I'm living on my own. I'm sharing a house with two women, so I was the original Three's company. As it turns out, at the time we were just friends, but one of those women and I have been together for the last 43 years. So
that worked out nicely too.
Yeah, exactly. So we've been married. My 42nd anniversary is coming right up in about a month. And so I called up SPI, and I remember it distinctly. If I could find the date, if I looked hard enough, it was like August of 1976, and it was a day a hurricane was coming to Southampton, where I was working. So it was a hurricane bearing down. So I called up SPI, and it turns out this guy named Phil Cosnett, who did a number of games for SPI when he was a teenager, called like Invasion America. It was done by Phil Cosnett. And he was their receptionist, and they said, hey, Phil had to go back to high school. He was only a high school hire. And so I became the receptionist for SPI. They knew who I was. They offered me the job over the phone. And on September 1st, 1976, I showed up, and I was the receptionist for SPI. And so this is a period of time at SPI when monster games are becoming in vogue. Berg did Terrible Swift Sword. It was a very big success. Wellington's Victory was just coming onto the market at that time.
The Waterloo game, yeah.
And there was this other game called Highway to the Reich, which is a big market garden game. And this guy, old friend who I haven't seen in years, but I hear he's doing well, Jay Nelson, was doing Highway to the Reich. And Jay had a lot of S&T, strategy and tactics games on his schedule. Now, every game could slip, but a strategy and tactics game was on a firm schedule, because we only had, there was a press, at that time, the kind of presses used for newspapers, the big web presses. We had a reserved time once every 2 months for 3 hours. And our galleries had to be on that press at that moment. You're as a publisher, this is our, and anything else, of course, is, a ton more money to do it, for late or whatever. Yeah. So those games had to be no kidding around. And so Jay had a number of these, and it's clear he wasn't getting to them. So So I've been there about a month now, working the receptionist and also selling games over this desk. But that was minor work. And Terry Hardy, who was the head of SPI R&D, comes up to the desk and he says, "We here's October War, and so we need somebody." And so and then that came right behind that. Dunnigan gave me Jerusalem 67 for the quad, Modern Battles quad, and so right away I had 2 games, and about a week later or so they found somebody else to do the receptionist job, and I was working on games, starting to do games.
So a little bit by accident, but you were already around there for testing, so they knew you, they knew your qualities already before they.
Yes.
Yeah,
Well, but exactly how Howie Barish had said to me at that Oregon, if you do these things, you'll be considered. And when I called up, I happened to call up at the exact right moment. I mean, Phil had just said, I'm leaving, I'm leaving.
Yeah.
And Howie needed to replace him. And I negotiated the other part that's of the story, the receptionist job, because it sold games, was the lowest job on the R&D. They were just organized that way. So the reception desk belonged to R&D.
Okay.
So, yeah. And what's kind of funny is when I got to SPI, and this is September of 1976, you're sitting at a front desk. People give you little odd jobs, but there wasn't that much to do. And so they had a library, like an actual library. And they just finished doing a game for the U.S. Army called Firefight. You might have heard of this game.
Yes, I have played it, yes.
And I'm 6'1", and there was about 7, it was in a corner, and they were stacked vertically. There were 7 feet of every single document the U.S. Army does, all their training manuals. And so for the month of September 1976, I read 7 feet of training manual. I knew everything about the U.S. Army at the end of 1 month. And so everybody saw me reading all these manuals, because I'm sitting at the front, you're sitting out in the open there.
Yeah.
And so that's why they end up giving me all these modern games, because I knew more about it than anybody else all of a sudden, because I just read, I used to be, I could fire, I could actually operate equipment if I actually had the equipment. I had read the manual how to shoot a tank and fire a minigun and all that good stuff.
But by the way, hello Jason, hello Ash, good to see you. But this leads me to a fascinating game in my opinion, and I think it was one of the first ones you worked on. And again, because you said it's a period of monster games, of huge games, multi-map games. It's the next war. So you worked on this one very early. I think it was 78. So for me, this is really astonishing, because even today, and I have this game. Of course, it's an old game. It's more than 40 years ago, but still it feels very modern. But what for me is really astonishing, that there is a very young person, a designer, pretty much a novice designer. You did a couple of games before, but they are handing you this project. So this is astonishing. So did this happen because they thought, yeah, well, this guy knows more than everybody else on modern day conflicts, or how did this happen?
Oh, it's fair. And by the way, I will come back to it. The next war, from a life career point of view, was the most significant game of my design of my career, and I'll explain, because it gave me another career. That's how I've become a defense consultant to the U.S. government from that game. So anyway, so if we go back a little before I got to SPI, Jim Dunnigan, who was his health, I talked to him just the other day. He's doing fine here in New York. We'll be seeing each other sooner than later, now that we're vaccinated. And Al Noki's back in here too. So Jim had already he had sort of become fascinated by these, what we can call them, contemporary military situations, right? So the Warsaw Pact and NATO. So Jim had already done, I know he'd done, I think he had done it was like a World War III game. He did about 2 or 3 games with that kind of, contemporary here and now. NATO, I think, being the most obvious one. And in the vein of this monster game period, he wanted to do a monster, he fed it back, a monster game on, the battle for Germany, which is your house somewhere on that map somewhere, I'm sure. So Dunnigan calls me in, and he is the actual designer of record. But worked for, and Richard Berg did this better because he was, but Richard would tell you if he was here that Dunnigan would give you about 2 or 3 pieces of paper with some scribbled on notes, nothing typed, and he'd give you an atlas and say, here's the game. So what I got next for, there were 3 pages. Page 1 was the basic idea, the basic design element of, continuous movement, combat, fatigue, all that. That was what I got on a piece of paper, like a paragraph written on a handwriting. So that was the basic idea of the whole operational system, but that was all I got. Then I got a piece of paper that had, a Warsaw Pact motorized rifle division is a 3-1 or, whatever the rate. Here are some ratings. Nothing about anti-aircraft or air or naval, nothing. Just here's what a ground unit's rating is going to be. And then the 3rd page was a combat results table, which, as it turned out, I learned, I assumed that he knew what he was doing when he gave it to me, but it turns out that it was, it violated a couple of math rules, which I fixed most of, but I couldn't fix all of it. And in a way, it's kind of a quirk that I actually like about the game, but it is not monotonic. And I'll explain what that in a minute. And then he gave me an atlas and said, do this. It's going to be 3 maps and, blah, blah, blah. And I spent that was like a 7 or 8 month project, big deal. And of course, a design and certainly the development is a lot more than 3 pages of, you've done a few games yourself. That's not a game.
Yeah.
So I designed the rest of it.
Yeah. But how long did it? Sorry, please go on.
No, the one thing I realized is his system didn't. That's why I created the breakthrough zones. Was actually the key design element that made that whole system of his work.
Okay.
Because otherwise, weird things happened. And that's when that was the first. I would say that's probably one of the first major. And that game, that the breakthrough zone thing has been used in a billion games since then. So it was like one of my first innovations in a game. But most people wouldn't understand it that way. It built that rule was required because of what he wanted to do, and it all came out well. And I did the air system and the naval system and all that stuff. But what happened was that game when it came out, number 1 was a big hit. And it was like the number 1 rated, number 1 selling rated game for SPI. If you look at the old what's selling sheet, you'd see at one time I had 5 of the top 10 selling games at SPI. So I was my games were being successful, monetarily for the company.
So if you are saying a game is commercially successful, what did it mean for a contemporary military game in numbers at SPI more than 40 years ago? What does it mean? Is it 5,000? Is it 20,000? Or is it even more units?
No. Next War would have sold. I have to be honest with you. I could get you an accurate. Dunnigan probably still has the spreadsheet. I mean, he knows the amount. I would say it sold around 10,000 copies.
Wonderful.
Which, by the way, for Victory Games, I can go over, would have been a horrible seller for Victory Games. So Victory Games were in the 20 to 30 range for any one of our games.
Yeah. And if you do not know Victory Games, you should know, but this is a company, I think it was owned by Avalon Hill. You were running it at President in the 80s, right? So that is a Fleet series, that is a Strike series, that is also Dr. Ruth game of good sex.
Yeah,
that is James Bond.
Yeah. We sold over 400,000 copies of that.
Yeah, somebody has to do the job, right?
But going back to the SPI, so the next War game comes out, and in play testing, and Dunnigan had some relationships to the United States Pentagon, military people. He knew this guy named Ray Macedonia, and these other guys used to come to him, and he used to dabble in that. And because I was doing all the modern, basically Dunnigan and I did all the modern games at SPI at that time. Nobody else was doing that stuff. If you wanted to be cool, you had to be doing Napoleonic games in that period. That was like the cool kids did Napoleonic games, and I was the cool kids do modern games.
Okay.
And Berg did all the Civil War games at that time. I did one of them. But anyway, so this guy named Phil Carver, who, by the way, is still a friend, and thankfully almost died, but didn't die of COVID. He's fine now, but it was he came close. You
Okay.
know,
Okay.
yeah. God bless him. Uh, he's about mid-70s now, and no, he's older than that, probably closer to 80. But anyway, he and I worked with another guy named Joe Braddock. So I got hired by this defense company to do those kind of modern simulations for the Pentagon. And so I left SPI and I went to work in a company called BDM Corporation, which stands for Braddock, Dunn, and McDonald. And it just so happens that one of my old mentors who I adored, a guy named Joe Braddock, just died, but he died of old age. He was 90, 91, and he died just like 30 days ago. So
Oh,
he had a
wow.
good run.
Yeah.
He had a good run.
Okay.
But
Okay.
amazing
Okay.
guy.
Mark, before we go to that, before we talk about this, I want to stay for a second here at SPI because I think, by the way, SPI is Simulation Publications Inc., based in New York, of course, because I think quite a few people have heard the name but really do not know why this company, at least in my opinion, is or was so special. So why do you think? Or was it special in your opinion, Mark? And if yes, why?
That's a great question. I think it will. So you have to. So the first war game designs, wargaming was really the purview of Avalon Hill. You know, Charles Roberts started it. They got into trouble with their publisher. This will be important later. There was a company called Monarch Printing used to print the Avalon Hill games, and Monarch acquired for its debts Avalon Hill. So it was Monarch that became Monarch Avalon. Eventually traded publicly, and ultimately Monarch Avalon will have another division called Victory Games. So that's how that evolved going forward. Avalon Hill used to produce about one war game a year, and they used to sell. Remember, this is the old days. They used to sell. Panzer Blitz, which is one of their classics, sold probably at least 250,000 copies.
Yeah, that's huge numbers. Yeah.
Yeah, all of their games. They only produce one a year, and we all sit around waiting for the game to come out. And then this guy named Chris Wagner, who was was a guy in the Army, created a magazine called Strategy and Tactics magazine. And somewhere along the way, I'd have to ask Dunnigan. He's told me before, but somewhere along the way, Chris gets financially in trouble, and Dunnigan acquires it with a guy named Redmond Simonson. But Dunnigan had already been doing sort of game design on his own. He did a game when he was at Columbia University. I won't pronounce it. Well, it's Up Against the Wall, Mother with an S. Yeah. So, and that was published in the Columbia student newspaper with the rules and the pieces. You cut them out of the newspaper and play the game. It was about riots in Columbia during during the 60s. And he did a couple. He did Chicago, which was about again. He started doing these kind of games, and then somehow he got a hold of S&T, took it over, and they started producing these games. And so what all of a sudden happened was the market went from one war game a year to Dunnigan's putting out 6 in S&T for starters, and he's putting out another 12 other games. So all of a sudden it goes 1 to 19 games. So from a when you ask what was the impact, well, it just the supply and demand equation just changed.
Yes.
Overnight.
Yeah.
From a public point of view, and the games were far more rustic than the Avalon Hill stuff. 2 color presses, sometimes one color, just black and white. But the systems were, Dunnigan had a really good, he's a very efficient. He and Simonson were very efficient designers. In other words, they created games that 2 or 3 mechanisms through a sequence of play, and they would shove everything. All that be shoved through those mechanics, no matter what. So and they would have series of games. So if you played one, you hadn't seen them all, but you'd seen enough of it with some new little twists. But there was sort of like a building block education of the public. So that once you start their games, it wasn't that hard to get into another one, at least in the early days.
Yeah.
And you can talk about some of these games. Go ahead. You want to say?
This is really interesting, and staying with strategy and tactics, I grabbed a magazine because I think lots of people, lots of viewers haven't seen this magazine, but it is really interesting, and this is already one of the later ones. Here it's
Yeah,
Tito,
yeah.
and you see it's a
I have.
normal it's a pretty standard magazine with the rules included at that time. This is from 1980 already, but what is interesting, each of these six magazines a year had a full game included, so 200 cardboard pieces, small pieces, but of course it's a paper map, but it needs to be folded into the magazine, but it's large, so it's not small. You see, this is a Tito map. And two other things which are very interesting to me is first, if you look inside and see how many copies have been printed, this is
36,000.
36,500 copies. So
How
it's
many?
36,500
Yep.
copies in circulation. So that's huge. And then, of course, you see the price. Yeah, it's 40 years ago. We know that price increases have happened. So sure. But this magazine costs $5. $5, and you're getting a complete simulation game. And this is, in my opinion, this is fantastic. And of course, you can grow the market in this regard. And it's really a great idea. And by the way, of course, not under SPI, Strategy and Tactics is still around, now published by Decision Games. So really, really interesting. And another thing that is, to me, looking back 40 years or more than 40 years, that is so interesting is that there is this building in New York City, SPI, and there aren't, of course, there will be freelancers, but in one place you have so much talent that is really these days not done anymore, because we have freelancers, we have people in Germany, in the US, and we're working together. But having this in one place, 10 designers, maybe 15, I don't know. This is, to me, this is fascinating. This is really fascinating.
Well, the economics. It's funny. SPI would still be around if the internet had been around, because at that time, because the economics of SPI were we were getting full retail price for everything. Once you went retail, where you had to sell to stores and you had to discount, they didn't figure that out. And whereas Avalon Hill and a guy named Dot, oh my God, there's Jackson Dot, its son, and it's
The owners of Avalon Hill, the
yeah,
of Monarch, yeah.
Monarch, yeah. He just passed away too. Anyway, Jackson's father, whose name will come to me in a minute. He understood how to sell. He was a salesman, and he sold to stores, and they made money from selling this. So he had the economics. SPI died trying to figure out those economics. They never figured that out, and that's why we went out of business. That's why Avalon Hill figured out how to do that like 20 years before that, so they were fine. They didn't. But so anyway, so anyway, the point is that the economics of the business were good in those days, and a lot of people were freelance. Like Richard Berg, for instance, he was a designer there, but he was a defense attorney in Brooklyn. He real job was a defense attorney, a public defender. And I was a full-time employee, but I was 22, and I was, starving to death. So, I was a starving artist. So, I mean, 3/4 of my income just went for housing, and then everything else was food after that. So, dating was challenging. I will be clear. You're very creative when you took a girl when you had no money. But anyway, all that aside. And so, I'll tell you how I did make money though in that period, which is kind of fun. So I used to make $100 a week take home. No, my take home was $79.86, but I had $100 a week salary, minimum wage being what was it, $2.50 an hour? Is that right? 250 times 40. That sounds right, doesn't it? Yeah, $100. So my take-home salary was $79, but what they had was conventions. So in other words, there were a lot of game conventions,
Mm-hmm.
and so the deal was SPI. So I started almost a side business with SPI. So, and any convention, I go to the convention, and SPI would pay for like the booth fee, like $300, $200, whatever the booth fee would
Mm-hmm.
be. They would give you the games on consignment, and
Mm-hmm.
you'd sell the games. You had to give back to SPI half the value of anything you sold and return whatever you didn't sell,
Mm-hmm.
and then you bore all the other expenses. So if you had to, fly a plane, or you had to you needed gas for the car, you ate food, and this other guy named Marty Goldberg also. And so I used to make, and I did this like 3 out of 4 weekends a month. So every weekend, I'm working a game convention, and I would probably make the equivalent of my salary every weekend.
Okay.
I make $100, working, and I'd probably make about $100 after expenses, splitting it with Marty from the game conventions.
Mm-hmm.
And remind me to tell you one of my best stories about the Star Trek convention. That's a good one.
Okay.
So the way I was able to survive was I sold a lot of games at game conventions, all in the Northeast mostly. I've been to Canada a few times, down to Virginia, but I didn't go to the West Coast at all. That was too much. The plane, you could never make the money transporting the games and all that. So that's how I made. I made ends meet. I survived.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, and I'm glad that you survived. So for sure. And Jason, I'm seeing your question here, but I would like to move this to a little bit later because we are talking pretty much at the end about some modern games or what Mark is doing these days. So I'm not forgetting you, but we get to this a little bit. Later, but you mentioned earlier, or a little bit earlier, that you did not stay at SPI till their end, or you first moved and then you came back. Is this correct?
Yeah. So I was at SPI the first time from, as I said, September 1st of '76, and I left in early November of 1978.
Mm-hmm.
No, yes, late 1978. So I was there for like, what is that? A little over 2 years, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I was there for a little over 2 years, and what happened was I mentioned that there was this woman who's in the next room.
Mm-hmm.
Her name's Carol, by the way. We were serious. We were going to get married. As it turns out, that worked out okay. And so I needed to make more money. You were going to get married. I couldn't live like a starving bachelor with a wife. That wasn't going to be a good idea. So I talked to Dunnigan, and yeah, Jim Dunnigan is a total above board, transparent, straight shooter.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't mince words. He doesn't use, just straight shooting. So I said to him, I need to make more money. So he said, I need a raise. He said no. But, but this is Jim Dunnigan. It's not no, like, no, I don't like you and you're not getting more money. He said, let me explain. And so he re-explained the entire economics of SPI to me and why he couldn't give me a raise. I mean, so it was a very satisfying answer, quite frankly.
Mm-hmm.
And so there was this guy, as I told you, because of the Next War project, I met this guy, Phil Carver. So I sent him, sent him, there's no email. I called him on the phone, and they flew me down for an interview. I mean, I didn't even know that was a thing. And I for an interview, and they hired me. And my salary went from like, I wasn't making a lot, but I think my salary now became like, instead of $5,200 a year, I was now making $17,000 a year,
Mm-hmm.
which is, that's a big,
yes.
it was a big jump. And actually at that point I was probably making closer to. I'd been at SPI for 2 years. I was probably making more like $8,000 or $9,000. So it was like it more than doubled my salary.
Mm-hmm.
I remember that it doubled my salary. And so now I asked Carol to marry me, and to her regret, to this day, she said yes. And and we got married, and we moved to Washington D.C. And I was working for a company called Braddock Dunn and McDonald, and I was just I was working for a client named Andrew Marshall, who passed away a couple of years ago. He was like sort of one of the brilliant strategic thinkers of the U.S. military, the Pentagon.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had these amazing men. They were all men. I apologize for the women out there, but there were these amazing older men who took a shine to a very hardworking. Hang on. Yeah, sorry about that.
That's okay.
No, believe it or not, I'm on the board of directors of the Marshall Chess Club, and tonight's a board of directors meeting.
Oh,
and so
wonderful! Yeah.
The director wants to. Now all the little politics and crap goes on. So I think I'm getting calls like, "Hey, what are you going to vote on the opening of the club?" and this, that, and the other thing. So we're trying to reopen the club, and I've got a position that I'm sure will reach. It is a very reasonable position, which will win, but it's going to be a lot of yelling and screaming to get to that. So anyway, continuing on. So I get to Braddock Dunn McDonald, and I'm working, and I was just really important people took a shine to me and educate. In fact, this guy Andy Marshall, at one point, I had come up with this set of mathematics to explain the value of information, and he thought it was really good. So he said, I want you to talk to my friend Dr. Tom Rona. I said, okay, I'll talk to Tom Rona. Sure, that sounds great. So remember, this is before Waze and Google Map and all this stuff. So I get instruction to an address, which turns out to be the executive office building in the United States. It turns out that Dr. Rona, because there's no internet to search it, is the deputy science advisor to President Reagan. Like, this is and so I sit down with Dr. Rona, who was a lovely man, and I explain my mathematics to a guy with 2 physics degrees. And he looks at me after this and he says, you have very, very creative and strong ideas, but you lack, he's German, he goes, you lack discipline. I can't say the way, he might have been Hungarian, but he had that kind of deep accent. He goes, you lack discipline. So for 2 years, literally the science advisor to the President of the United States for 2 years works with me. Like, I see him like once a month and represent my, tightening up my thinking. And basically I got a graduate degree from a brilliant man in how to become a disciplined thinker, which I hadn't gotten. So these are things that you can't. This is like being lucky as hell. And then I was hooked up with a guy named Admiral Sobrowski, who was like the strategic thinker for the United States Navy, and he and I created a whole system of systems warfare, with information and missiles, and I worked with him one-on-one and created this thing. So I was working with some of those brilliant military thinkers in the United States while designing classified war games for the Pentagon. And it was just an amazing experience, but all because I did next war.
So you see, wonderful. But you did return to SPI, at least briefly, didn't you?
Yeah, so what happened was consulting is I'd gotten promoted a few times. It was paying pretty well, but my wife in particular really missed mommy in New York, and and I wanted to make I'm in love with her and I wanted to make her happy, and so I didn't have any other options. You start making money, it becomes almost like a golden handcuffs kind of thing, right? But one day I get a call from a guy named Brad Hessel, who was the head of R&D for SPI, and he comes down. He says, "Hey, can I have lunch?" And I said, "Oh, I wonder what." I figured he just wanted to have lunch. And it turns out he gave me a job offer to come back because they had gotten a Pentagon contract to do a game for the Pentagon through SPO, which they'd done before with the U.S. Army with Firefight. But apparently none of them understood what was going on with the contracting. They didn't understand the design wasn't happening, and it was just a disaster. And they were bringing me. So I started a government contract division for SPI, and I was able to keep my salary basically.
Wow, good.
And so, and I remember telling Carol, I said, "Hey, I got a job back at SPI." I think she had packed her bags already and was out the door before I could even further have it. She was on her way to New York already. I had to catch her to the car. She was going to New York so fast. And so I go back to SPI, and it turns out that SPI is in its, like the decline and fall of the Roman Empire. This is the fall piece. And,
Okay.
It's a disaster financially, and they're not, and so I was always a good corporate citizen, so I started trying to help out. So I was doing the government stuff, but that's when I designed the Conan game, and it's when I
Yeah.
designed RTF, and so I started designing games for them. But I was paying because I was doing this government thing. I effectively was paying my own salary. I was generating a business that paid for me, so I wasn't a burden on their financials. I remember Chris came to me and said they wanted to cut my salary. I said, okay, that's okay, but if you cut my salary, you're going to cut your income. And he went like, yeah. So it was just that kind of. I was almost like a side business inside SPI at that point, but I was doing all these other things, and then any time, and because of circumstances in the real world, like when the Israelis bombed the Iraqi Osirak reactor in Libya, all that. I was like the only military person in New York City, so I was on the news a lot. In various news channels. My friends would see me on TV. It was kind of fun, but the point of the story is that the company is falling apart, and they look for get a loan from TSR, Dungeons and Dragons.
Yes.
And by the way, this is a little aside. Has anybody ever said to me, "Did you ever play Dungeons and Dragons?" The answer is yes. And by the way, the first time I played Dungeons and Dragons, Gary Gygax was my dungeon master.
Wow.
And I played the game, and Dave Arneson was in the game with me. So I've been around.
It can't get better.
Yeah. In fact, when they got into a bad place, they started, when Dave Arneson sued Gary Gygax because they weren't paying him correctly and all this. I was probably one of the few people that was friends with both of them. They would each talk to me and bitch about the other one to me, and I just would tell the other. I was always good at keeping secrets. Gary would tell me Dave's being unreasonable. Dave would tell me Gary's being unreasonable. I said, oh my God, it's terrible. What am I going to say? Eventually, Gary lost in court and Dave got paid, which was the right thing to happen anyway. But I like both of them. Most people will remember that Gary Gygax started as an Avalon Hill freelance game designer. He did Alexander the Great.
Oh, interesting. I didn't know that. Oh, wow.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I remember Gary's the rules that we were playing were, there were 6 little mimeograph booklets. It was really a medieval tactical system. But the big innovation for D&D was, one, the magic thing, right? Bringing magic into medieval tactical. And the idea that there would be a dungeon master. That was the big, somebody who was telling a story, not playing a game.
Yeah, right.
It's brilliant stuff. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah,
anyway,
absolutely.
So TSR, I digress. So TSR comes along, and it was really a corporate takeover. So they lend SPI a bunch of money, and I never saw the contract, but they gave us a bunch of money to keep us going. And about less than 60 days later, they called the loan, and we couldn't pay it, and they took us over. And then I get called in. I'm doing my thing, and I get called in by this. There were these 2 guys called the Bloom brothers. I talked to the short fat one. I don't remember the other one, but the short fat one called me in for an interview, and he said to me, "We're taking over the company. We want to keep you. Thank you very much, and you're going to love Lake Geneva."
Okay, Wisconsin. Okay.
Yeah, and it was never a he wasn't. It was more like I was an indentured servant being told, "You're getting on the next boat to America. Congratulations," or "We're going to hang you," and we're either going to hang you or we're going to put you on a boat to America. But congratulations. So and of course, the whole thing of getting Carol back to New York, going to Wisconsin it was either get divorced or get another job, right? Those were my real choices, not whatever he was saying. And it was a little bit arrogant. I didn't like him. I didn't want to work for him. So I called up Eric.
Eric is, yeah.
I mean, now that my brain is back onto these old stories. I'm 66. Things, it all works. It just takes a little bit of time to re-engage.
All good.
The synapse. So I call up Eric. And by the way, I want to say I love Eric Dot, a wonderful man, taught me a lot about business. Great guy. He had a good life, but it's sad. This is the problem when you're 66. All your friends, either you're dead or your friends die. But and if you're dead, you don't care. But it's sad. Anyway, Eric. So I called up Eric, and so I'm going to tell you what a brilliant businessman he was in one sentence. He says to me, "I want you to start. We want to come work for Avalon Hill." He goes, "Nah." He talked like this. "Nah. You're going to start a new game company for me." And I said, "Well, why?" He goes, "Avalon Hill can only get this much shelf space. If I can get another game company, I can double my shelf space." That was his entire strategy. You just heard it. It was just shelf space and retailers. So I started Victory Games for him. I was actually not the president. I was the executive vice president in charge of Victory Games. I was the head of it.
Okay.
We were in
okay.
We were in Manhattan. And that's the whole Victory Games story through the 80s. It did that from about
Yeah.
1979. This is like 80. This is now SPI goes down in sometime in 1980, like early summer 1981, late spring. I think it was the spring of 1981. Yeah, it's the spring of 1981. We start Victory Games in June, and I think if you ever look, there's an interview. Harold Buchanan has a YouTube video. You can see me and John Butterfield. We talk about Victory Games a lot.
Yeah.
John Butterfield's great designer, good friend, and he was one of the designers who came from SPI. So basically, once I told people what was on, everybody wanted to join up. So one day when the Blooms were in town, I walked in and everybody just one after another. We put our resignation letters on his desk and we walked out. That was it.
I'm sure that felt well. That was a good thing. Yeah, and by the way, there is in the chat a comment from Riff Pirat 63. He likes the Peloponnesian War, and yes, and this game, by the way, has been redone recently by GMT in a new edition. Yeah.
And to be clear, by the way, so Peloponnesian War is a Victory Games. That is correct. However, Peloponnesian War was not done while I was at Victory Games. I did that as a freelance project after I left Victory Games and went back to the government market.
Okay.
Because what happened between then and then is, once again, life intercedes. I needed to make more money because I had a baby girl. Well, actually, to be accurate, my wife had the baby girl. I just happened to be around at the time. And by the way, that little baby girl now is 37, and I have a 4-year-old granddaughter. So this is how this all works, you see.
Yeah.
And so I needed to make more money. I went to Eric Dott. He was very nice about it. He said, the industry, that was when the board game industry, especially, this is now this is 1987 now. And in 1987, sales are collapsing. The Atari is taking over, and it's rough times in the war game business. And you might remember those days.
Yeah.
And so I got a job, and I was still doing to make extra money for the company, so the guys could get raises. I was still doing government work through Victory Games for the Pentagon. I was offered a job in a company called Booz Allen Hamilton, where I left Victory Games and went to Booz Allen Hamilton's, and I for obviously making more money. And I'd already had the little girl, so that was a good thing.
Yeah.
But my wife lost the battle staying in New York. We had to go back to D.C. I spent the whole life going back between New York and D.C., by the way. So we go back to D.C. We were there for like the next 27 years. And in that period of time, I became a senior partner at Booz Allen. Running the company.
Yeah, your career is wonderful. So at all stages, and I really admire you for what you did, and not only in gaming, but also as a book author, as lots of different things. And what we will definitely do here is, if you agree, Mark, of course, is that I'd love to have you as my guest again, talking maybe about Victory Games. Definitely about card-driven games, because as I said initially, Mark single-handedly invented that category of games. But today I would like to touch a couple of 3 different things. One is an anecdote that you told me, and this is fascinating to me. And if you care, Mark, please repeat this.
Sure.
This is about Herman Balk. So this is a German officer, but please put it into context.
So remember I told you I went to this company called BDM Corporation?
Yes.
This would be, so I was at BDM. I got married. So I got to BDM in January of 1979, because I got married in April of 79. And so this would probably be the summer, I would say it's the summer of 79 or the fall of 79. It was probably the fall of 79, because I remember now what I was wearing. So it's the fall of 79. And at the time, we're at the height of the Cold War. We're the Warsaw Pact, and this is the real Cold War, not the one in the next war, but the real thing. And you might recall, so obviously there was World War II, and there's a whole. If you look at the resumes of all of the West German, the Federal Republic of Germany's officer, General Officer Corps, you'll find that they were all junior to mid-level officers in World War II for the Wehrmacht. Nothing on their resume. And in 1950, 51, all of a sudden they were in the German army again.
Yeah.
This is the gap decade, I guess you want to call it. And the United States in this period started looking at, okay, the Warsaw Pact is going to be this horde of guys, coming from the East, and how do we stop them? And they got into, there was this sort of like a thing happened where the U.S. government, parts of the government wanted to say, were there any lessons learned that the Germans had from fighting the Russians on the Eastern Front? So my boss got a contract, and we brought in, and Jim Dunnigan, by the way, was brought into it to discuss some of the things there. So Jim Dunnigan was there also. I got him invited, and we had General Herman Bolk, and we had von Mellenthin.
Yeah. So his former adjutant. Yeah.
Yeah. His adjutant, but also he was the G2 for Rommel, which will be the last part of the story, which is my best part of the story. So Bolk comes in. Bolk at the time is 81 years old and very thin. And again, I've heard enough Yiddish in my life, but I don't understand German very much. But his German was very low tone, low energy conversation. He was, as a lot of older men are, he's like bent forward a little bit, and they talked to him, and as an interpreter, von Mellenthin's, nephew or something is the military adjutant to the West Germany's embassy. So we have a lieutenant colonel from the Wehrmacht, very nice guy. He's von Mellenthin's nephew, I think. And so he's watching after the two old guys from Germany, keep them out of trouble, make sure they get to where they're. And von Mellenthin's a very spry, 78-year-old who is something to do with Lufthansa out of South Africa. I don't remember. He had some job out of running operations out of South Africa for Lufthansa. So they come to this conference, and they're trying to understand, what are the mechanics of defeating a Russian attack in World War II. And it covers very extensively the Chia River battles, in the Eastern Front, which I'm sure quite familiar with.
Yeah.
So I designed a war game with miniatures. We had all these little, the tanks are about that big. I don't know how big, they're like the 1/60th scale, whatever that scale is, where the micro armor, the GHQ micro armor. I had pieces. We had real maps, and it took up most of big. We're doing 1 to 50,000 scale maps. So that Germany, southern Germany is a lot of maps. And so that's the U.S. at that time, the U.S. 5th and 7th Corps, and so in the morning we had a guy named General Gorman, who became a very famous American general, he controlled the 8th Mechanized Division, and he explained to Bolk and von Mellenthin in the morning how he was going to fight the battle against the Soviets in his area. And then in the afternoon, and this is the part of the story that gets interesting, we have Bolk commanding the U.S. 1st Armored Division. And so all of a sudden, there was this woman interpreter. She explains to him that he is now going to command an armor division again. And all of a sudden, this little 81-year-old man, it's like they plugged an electric socket into him. He straightens up, shoulders back, head up. His eyes are on fire, I swear to God. And all of a sudden, I'm listening to Adolf Hitler talking. I mean, it sounds that that you've heard how that how Hitler's the lilt of his speech, it's very bursty, I can't.
Very direct. Yeah.
Staccato. It's like a staccato, and he starts, and they tell him that he has how many. He goes, "How many tanks do I have?" They go, 325. He goes, "I'm going to Moscow."
Yep.
And he and von Mellenthin, he goes, "I will talk to my chief of staff for 10 minutes, and we'll tell you our battle orders." And so I won't go into all the details, but they talk for 10 minutes, and then he barks out what they're going to do. And it was the scariest thing. I was looking at a note. Remember, Bolk never, the never recanted being a Nazi. They had him in jail for 2 years. He wouldn't do it. They just let him go.
Yeah, and this is what I found so interesting is first, that to bring over to the U.S. German officers from World War II. Yeah, but it's a Cold War, as you said. But Hermann Balck, of course, he was highly decorated in World War II. But of course, he's a war criminal, and so he was in jail because he shot a German lieutenant colonel in the Second World War without court martial because he was drunk. So he simply had him shot. And then in France, several towns were razed by his troops completely, and the people driven out. And that suddenly you Americans, you are in the same room with this very old officer, and he's barking out orders. So this is for me. I'm getting a shiver here. So.
Yeah, and by the way, just so you know, I knew all of this obviously, and the entire time I wore my shirt open and I had a Jewish star on.
Very good.
The whole time. I wanted him to see it.
Very good. Yeah.
Anyway, so he gave out what was quite literally his draw them in, hit them in the flank strategy, which is what he used in the Cheer River. And the moment he was done giving his orders, it's like all the power went out. And he went back down to being 81 quiet. It was 10 minutes of horror to watch a Nazi armor general be. I never saw one before. I saw one once, and it was frightening as hell. Yeah. I will tell you that.
Yeah, I can imagine. This story is really amazing, and thank you for sharing it here.
Let me tell you the best part of the story, though. The best part of the story comes now.
Please go on. Mm-hmm.
So now, and again, remember, I'm young. They say to me, drive them to the conference is over, drive them to the airport. Mm-hmm. So I have like a muscle car. So we put Balck and the lieutenant, the nephew, very nice. The lieutenant colonel was very nice. We put him and Balck in the back of this car, and there was this girl named Debbie. She was like worked for me, so she's in the back. So she's sitting in the back between these two guys, and I got Van Mellington sitting in the front seat with me, and I'm driving the car. So I'm driving along, and I knew that he was. So I go to him. I go, so he's going to be with me for 3 hours. I go, so what was Rommel like? I ask him. Mm-hmm. And this is G2, and he goes, oh, and so here's what he told me. He told me that Rommel, he was a G2. He said, we never knew where Rommel was. We never knew where the hell he'd get on his Storch plane, and he'd leave in the morning. And we would call, he'd never answer, because of radio security, they didn't want him getting shot down. So he was just running around, and then all of a sudden, what would happen is he would find something going on, and he'd land the Storch plane, get out, and you'd be this reconnaissance guy for the Africa Corps, and all of a sudden you could be like a sergeant, and all of a sudden Rommel, the field marshal, sitting next to you, going, "What's going on?" Mm-hmm. And you just show up literally where the shooting was. They would call from the plane where he was, and their job was to just send everything they had. They just send it to that spot. That was the whole strategy. Mm-hmm. They just send. You go there. You send all these battalions, companies, whatever. They just send them to the spot wherever Rommel was, and that's how he fought the battle. Hmm. One bullet, and he told me that Rommel was just, that kind of. He used the word Fingerspitzengefühl.
Fingerspitzengefühl, yeah. Mm-hmm.
I couldn't say it correctly.
No, that was perfect. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that was his whole that was his tactical genius. He would understand in the moment what was going on and how to win. Mm-hmm. Brilliant tactical general.
Interesting.
Not so good with logistics. Yeah. So I got that from Von Mellington directly. And I actually have a signed copy of Panzer Battles from him. I had my own copy. He signed it for me. I still have it.
Yeah, wow. Amazing times. But, Mark, I want to briefly, at pretty much at the end, so still two things to do. On which projects are you working currently, Mark? And let me know before I forget it, because Jason had this question, which is related to this. He's asking, Fort Sumter has been successful at bringing new players into historical gaming. Do we have more games coming in this series?
Yeah, so there is I didn't do it. But it's based on that system. I want to call it. It's about the Commune of Paris. It's like Red Barrack.
Okay.
It's on
yeah.
TNT stuff. Mm-hmm. So that one is definitely a variant of Fort Sumter, and of course there's the computer version. And then I don't think it's a variant at all of it, but it's a really good game in that series. Is Harold Buchanan has one called South China Sea coming out, which is meant to be that lunchtime series that Gene called it, but
Lunchtime
it's not.
series it is.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's deviated quite a bit from the Fort. It's its own thing at this point, I
Yeah.
would say. But it's very played it 3 times already. I played it 3 times. Very good. Harold done a great job with it. So
And
that
mhm.
Sumter, and I actually have. Well, I'll say it here. I mean, are you going to post this on YouTube after? Do you post this
Yes.
anywhere?
Yes.
Well, so I have a design. It's not like Fort Sumter exactly, but it's the piece of Nikias.
Hmm.
Covers that
Interesting topic.
period when the war ends. It's the period of the Peloponnesian War when they're technically not fighting each other.
Mhm.
And the goal of the game is one, the Athenians want to try to keep Nicias wants to try to keep the peace, and the Spartans want to try to break it.
Mhm.
So the game is a tension between can I get this war kicked off again without breaking my oath.
Mhm. Interesting. So I'm very much looking forward
And I added
to
one more in that series is going to be the death of Caesar.
mm. Yeah, you're busy. And by the way, it's confirmed by the chat that the title for the Paris game is Red Flag over Paris. So that's the
That I knew it was
title
something. I knew
of
it had
that one.
but I couldn't remember all the whole thing.
But in addition, you have a very small game. So Pacific War Second Edition, right? So which you are currently doing.
It's right over there. Yeah, no, we're actually pretty far along. The counters are finished. I mean, other than maybe a couple of typos, I think we have 2 or 3 typos we're going to change, fix obviously. Um, the map is really nice. It's really good. The I'm now focused entirely on scenario checking and more history, research on that. And Kai Jensen, do you know Chad
Yes,
Jensen's widow
yes, yes.
Kai is rewriting all the rules. But what we're doing this time, so one of the problems with the original, if anybody has it, is it was it's really a game system, not it's more than one game. It's really like a lot of games, only you get it all in one box. And if you remember the original rules, you started with these. You taught you like you took these scenarios and used only these rules, and then you added, and you had the battle scenarios, and then you had the campaign scenario, then you had the strategic scenario, and it was a great. And a lot of people were able to. It really worked to bring people into a very complex game system. The problem with the rules was that once you knew the game, finding a rule was misery because you almost had to memorize the rules to say, okay, that was a campaign rule. It's in this section. Even with the index, it's a nightmare. I mean, even I have trouble sometimes finding a sentence that I know is in there somewhere. So what we did this time is you're going to get 3 separate rules booklets. Rule booklet 1 is just the engagement scenarios, and you'll probably use that for all of one day, and you'll never use it again. Then the battle scenario booklet has all the rules. It's like a normal front to back set of rules with every rule you need to play battle scenarios. And then anytime you want to do that, you only use that. But then the campaign and strategic scenario has a proper front to back rule book with everything indexed, and that's what Kai is working on right now, so that and so you don't have to go hunting around for
Yeah.
pieces of the rules.
Makes a lot of sense, and to everybody who's maybe interested in this game. Yes, it's a huge game if you look at the components, but because it scales so well, the battle scenarios, the shorter campaign scenarios, let's say for Guadalcanal, they can be handled very well. And I've
Yeah, but
played. Yeah.
yeah, go ahead, please.
I played the game, the Victory Games edition, with my brother and Dirk Dahlmann. You know him. We played Westphalia
Oh, sure.
at my father, so at my parents' house, still in the mid '80s when the game was out. But I can probably I will never play the campaign, the full campaign, 41 to 45 again because it's so long. But I'm really looking forward to play some of these small campaign scenarios for Guadalcanal or for something else. So it's a really fantastic system, and I can only encourage everybody to check this game out. Yeah.
I will tell you two things. One, the game is about the campaign scenario. It's not about the war. The
Yeah,
war scenario was a necessary marketing tool that you could play the whole war.
yeah.
So, and I have played the campaign scenario when I did the original game twice,
Hmm.
and I played it one more time when I was before I did Empire of the Sun. And the
Hmm.
reason I did Empire of the Sun is you can't play. Well, two things I want to say. One, the campaign scenario is more or less it's playable, but it's going to take you I don't know 150 hours to do it, and
For sure. Yeah,
and it's insane to even try. However, I'm upgrading it, and it's going to be there. And we've now had some versions that we can play part of the war, not the whole war. So
yeah,
that'll make it a little bit, but still huge undertaking regardless. The game is really about the game has two basic pieces. The game was really designed by me so you could play out the initial Japanese attack,
mm.
which is called the Southern Conquest scenario,
Mm.
and all of the scenarios around New Guinea and the Solomons. That's what the game is. It is a complete game. In fact, when I before I did this version of it, I thought I was just going to produce it in pieces as complete games
Yeah.
because the Bismarck scenario could take you 20 hours, but the Guadalcanal scenario, which is one my favorite,
Mm.
that's about a long afternoon.
Yeah, yeah, it's perfect for a convention whenever there are conventions.
Yeah, yeah.
Again,
So
the system is modern. It's still modern, although designed in the 80s, because it scales so well. From air battles to sea battles to land battles. It's really great games.
I'm proud of it. Don't get me wrong, but I will tell you this: that this was a weird journey, and the game's going to come out. Obviously, we got 20 over 2,000 orders for it. This is going to be a one and done. I'm not doing it again.
Yeah, I
And
can
I will.
imagine.
And the amount of work it's taking to get this done, I told my wife, I said, this is not a game I would design now.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
could
sure.
design it now, but I wouldn't design it now. It's just too big,
Yeah,
And anybody who buys it and feels like they're worried that they should buy it, don't buy it. I don't
yeah,
care if anybody buys
yeah.
it. There are 2,000 people. If you want to complain about, oh, you should have done this, you made it more streamlined. Now everybody gets beat to, oh, I would have done it this way. You know what? Screw you. I ain't going to do it any different way. I don't care what you think. Don't
Yeah.
buy the game. Get rid of it. I'm telling everybody, if you have any thoughts of or hesitation, don't buy the game.
Yeah.
Just do me a favor. I don't want to look at the questions. Don't care.
Mark, I will send you immediately some questions, so you have it in your inbox. No, I won't. I
There
won't.
you go.
Let me finish with an announcement here, a very brief announcement for
Sure.
today before we close this up, because Mark will also design something for Spielworxx. So we don't ask us immediately when will this game out. There is no target date. It will come out, but it's
And
a
also the COVID took a whole year out of us.
yeah, it is what it is. But it will be a strategic level World War II game. So, but it's not Pacific War, but it's playable. It's probably with one game board, one map, and it's a short playing time, innovative mechanics, low complexity. So my motto for this game is one evening, one map, one world war. So I think
Perfect.
then we
No,
are
you
we are
should
fine.
actually have the game is actually there is actually a set of rules and a design for it. I sent them to you once, didn't I?
Yes, of course, of course. So
Yeah. So I
I'm
so
excited.
but Peter Perla, who is my compatriot in this little endeavor, he owes me a map. As soon as he get a map, we're ready to go. We're just a play. So I gotta go beat on Peter. But this COVID thing has just destroyed a year of my life and
Yeah.
everybody else. Somebody's killed people, so I don't want to complain. But yeah, it's gonna take me. It won't be. It'll probably be like so Essen in so I would say realistically, this is like Essen because I want to come to Essen with the game, so it'll be like Essen 2022. I think is where I'm
Yeah.
thinking is where I'm going to land
Yeah,
this thing.
Essen this year is very much in doubt. Looking at the situation in Germany and the vaccination tempo,
It
I'd
could be
love
23
to.
if things get extended with the COVID. It could be 23. Who knows?
Yeah, exactly. So nobody knows, but I'm so excited for this game whenever it is out. And looking at the chat here, some other people are also very interested. So yeah, great, great and wonderful. Mark, as I said, So first, of course, thank you very much for being my guest here. It's always a pleasure. I am glad when we are playing Westphalia pretty soon again. So we are sitting at least at at a virtual gaming table again. And a promise, I'm asking you, or a threat, whatever you're thinking, I'm asking you again to be my guest to talk about maybe the Victory Games period, and of course about card-driven games. So because this is my favorite type of games, and I think more people should know more about it.
Well, I will tell you this. You and I have been friends, I got to believe, 25, almost 30 years by now, right?
Yeah.
So I will be happy to come to any one of your. You want me to come on? I'm always happy to come on for you.
Thank,
No problem.
so
No.
thank you so much. And next week will be a regular Spielworxx weekly chat episode with me presenting Spielworxx and industry news. So if you are having a question that you'd like to ask in advance, or have a suggestion for a topic, please drop me an email at uli@spielworxx.de. That is uli@spielworxx.de. And till next week, bleibt gesund, Black Lives Matter. Bye bye. Bye.